Hi everyone, this is Stephanie. I'm one of the lecturers for the financial literacy curriculum here at U of T and also a new staff position as of 1 month. I've had several residents ask me to do a lecture on what it's like to become a staff doctor and the transition process. And it's been incredibly stressful the last couple of months, especially in trying to get licensed as a staff during the pandemic. And there's a lot that I know now that I wish I knew back then because I was pretty unprepared. I didn't really know a lot of stuff. And so I'm just going to kind of tell you some of the things you should know, just so that it can be much easier for you to transition from residency to a staff doctor. So I put together this video that goes over the timelines of when to get things done and to kind of give you some tips around the job search and around getting a billing number, because this was definitely the most frustrating part of the process, where a mistake can delay your income for a few months. And also to kind of give you some overall impressions, I'm pretty transparent about like salary and earnings and things like that, because I think it's important for you guys to know when it comes to repaying that huge amount of debt, and also provide you with some like resources that would be helpful for you too, that I didn't have, but I wish I did. So I don't have any conflicts of interest to disclose. So let's talk a bit about the timeline to licensing from a month-to-month perspective. So back in January and February, there'll be a lot of deadlines for things. So for example, as a family medicine resident, I had to plan to pay for the CFPC exam by the deadline of February 1st. And I've also included the Royal College exam just to kind of generalize it a bit for the specialist, and the MCC QE2 if you haven't done that already in October, and you're planning to do it in May. And I've also included some of the prices of things because yes, you should budget for these things ahead of time if you know that this is going to be an expensive month. In January, I also started doing some self-studying for exams because they will take place in April, May. And I've also started doing some very brief job search type stuff, like updating my CV, updating my LinkedIn. And I also started to get a police check, not necessarily for the job search component, but more for getting the license itself to become an independent doctor. Police checks can take a long time to process and to deliver to your house. By the time it's March, that's when I started doing a bit of group studying for the exams. I also started emailing out my CV for jobs, getting passport photos as part of the licensing process, because you'll need that. And I also started filling out my CPSO or whatever your provincial equivalent is when it comes to licensing. Now, because the pandemic happened around this time, in April, I would have had my exams, but those got delayed. But in a normal situation, you would be having exams. And I also submitted my CPSO, which is my license for independent practice application, near the 3rd week of April as well. And I recommend you start getting this done as soon as possible, like this part, because there's a lot of components in the process that requires one part to be finished before you can start on the second part. And the cost of this is about 2.7K, which is pretty expensive. In May, that's when I started really gearing up for applying for jobs. So I started doing phone interviews for jobs. I also converted my CMPA coverage. So CMPA is our kind of like malpractice insurance provider. And I also looked in getting a separate bank account for my work-related earnings and a personal bank account. I also increased my disability insurance and got in contact with the OMA, or your provincial medical association, to look into health and dental coverage, because you'll no longer have health and dental once you're no longer a resident. And then in June 11th specifically, that's when I actually got my independent license to practice approved. In a normal situation, that's when you would get your exam results back. And then, you know how I said that you can't start on a second part without finishing the first part? So you can't actually apply for a billing number, which is what you would use to get paid, until you become approved for your independent license. So that's why on June 30th, that's when I submitted my billing number request. And then this might be more relevant for family doctors, but I also applied for a WSIB account for like if someone comes in with workplace related injuries and they saw me, that would be like insurance covered care. And on like maybe the second last week or the last week of June, like really close, that's when I like finalized my job offer and signed the job contracts that I needed. So then on July 2nd, that's when I started working. And I currently work in an addictions medicine clinic in an academic center. I also work in transitional housing, also affiliated with an academic center. So what this is it doesn't actually look like this, but what it is for low-income seniors and I guess younger individuals who either can't afford to live in a retirement home or a long-term care home, or for younger folks, they're too medically complex to be cared for in a shelter setting. So they often go to a transitional setting after they've been discharged from hospital and are kind of in transition for where they're going to go next. And I also do telemedicine in a community clinic, so in the community setting. And with hospital settings, usually there's no overhead, which is pretty nice because overhead can be quite expensive. It could be like 30% of your gross earnings. Some places might be a bit cheaper. I like teaching residents and like coming up with lectures for residents. And the other nice thing is that when you're kind of starting out, there's a lot of allied health support and a lot of senior staff who are available that you can kind of ask for what to do, and so that you're on top of things when it comes to like your educational knowledge. In a community setting, this is actually more independent. I feel like you're more on your own, and it's good for learning billing because with the 30%, that kind of goes to clinic overhead, and for some clinics, it also goes to a billing agent as well, or a billing manager. And this individual is responsible for submitting your billings and also checking that you've billed correctly. And as a new staff, like this is probably my weakest component, where I might not know like what exactly to bill for what cases I've seen. And so having kind of like an external stakeholder who relies on your income to get paid as well kind of helps you be on top of knowing what to do in that kind of situation. And so you might be wondering like, oh, you're working in so many different settings. How do you have time to work in all these settings? So yes, I do work 6 days a week. I do work quite a lot, but I have a very flexible schedule. So I might not necessarily be working 6 full days a week. I can work a half day if I wanted to. I can move things around in my schedule such that I might not necessarily be working 6 full days a week. So when it comes to the job search, a lot of people ask me, oh, where do you go to find jobs? So the most common place to look is at Health Force Ontario for jobs. And if you're not in Ontario, if you're somewhere else, likely your province has an equivalent website that groups all across the province can post job opportunities. And this doesn't just apply to family medicine, it can apply for like specialists as well. So you just have to, you know, change your specialty. If you're looking for a locum versus a full-time position, you can kind of adjust as well. And a lot of these job offerings start getting posted in like February to March, sometimes even to May as well. So feel free to check that site then. There's also, specifically for family medicine job opportunities Facebook group as well, where people will advertise job opportunities. And this is also pretty good because sometimes you'll find job opportunities on here that weren't posted on Health Force Ontario. And the other place to look is within your own network. So your program director will often send you through email job opportunities, or you can even ask them like in person as well. Checking your past clerkship supervisors as well as elective supervisors if they are looking for any locums or full-time opportunities taking over their clinic. And often these kind of jobs aren't really advertised because sometimes the person who's leaving the job position might just email the program director of the closest residency program in the catchment area. So they may not necessarily be advertised. And another way that I sort of found I got interviewed for a job was through CARMS interviews. So I did interviews for the match process, and often with these interviews, it's you and you're paired with a staff doctor. And so when you both are interviewing people, sometimes there's like free time to kind of just talk amongst yourselves, and you can even ask them for opportunities and openings in their clinics. And again, these are all ways of looking for job opportunities that aren't really advertised. And so that might be kind of good because there are certain practices like or geographic locations that are very desirable, but they don't necessarily advertise it. So looking within your own network and kind of networking at other opportunities can be very beneficial as well. So when it comes to billing and getting paid, this is probably the most frustrating part of the whole process so far, because there's a lot of like waiting, and there's also a lot of room for error. So I'll explain what I mean. So for example, like when you are a resident, I've actually heard a lot of people, including myself, say this phrase: I can't wait to graduate and make staff income, because a lot of us have, huge amounts of debt, and we are ready to like pay that off. But what often we don't know and realize is that you don't get paid until you get your billing number. And the only like caveat with that is unless you're salaried, in which case when you graduate, then in your first month, yes, you do get paid with the salary. And unfortunately, you can't apply for a billing number until your independent license becomes approved. And so for myself, if you saw in the earlier slide, I got my license approved on July 11th. So as soon as I got approved, I submitted my application for my billing number. And the unfortunate thing is I submitted it on June 11th or June 12th, like as early as I can, because I'm someone who likes to try to do things early. But then I got an email back saying that, oh, like most people, their CPSO license doesn't actually come into effect until June 30th or July 1st, as you can see in this email. So then I was like, oh, okay, so I'll just wait until June 30th to submit my billing number. And that was probably my first mistake, because I waited until June 30th to submit for my billing number, but that's kind of when everyone else probably also waited to submit. And so even though it says here that most processing times for the billing number to get approved is 15 days, it's 15 days after the day that your application gets received by the person who's doing the processing. So I submitted it on June 30th, but it didn't actually get received or get, examined until July 7th. So I would have to wait 15 days from July 7th instead of June 30th, which is the date I applied. So my first tip is apply 5 days before June 30th or July 1st to beat the wave of applications coming in. Because some of my colleagues, they actually received their CPSO license later than me, like July 26th, and they applied on that day instead. And they actually received their billing number earlier than me, despite applying later than me. So that's just something to keep in mind. So on July 22nd, that's when my billing number was finally mailed out. And the thing to note is that they'll actually mail you a letter, and even if it's been approved, you don't get your billing number online. So even though on July 22nd my billing application was approved, you still have to wait until Canada Post to mail out the physical letter. So then on July 27th, that's when I got my welcome package in the mail. And that's what it looks like. It's two envelopes. And so one of the envelopes contained your billing number, and the other envelope contains something called your medical claims electronic data transfer unique identifiers letter. And so what this letter is that there's like an online system where your billings are submitted from the EMR system or whatever billing software you use to that online system, and that's where it gets processed, and you can kind of see where things don't get certain billings get rejected or not. So make sure you get both letters. And the letters look very like plain, so it's even though it's a welcome package, it's just two letters in the mail. The main other mistake that some people have been affected by is that be careful about what you put as your primary versus your mailing address. Because so when you apply for your OHIP number, this is what the application looks like. It's like a PDF that you submit. You have to put down your primary practice address. And I guess maybe for like safety reasons or something, or privacy reasons, it will be mailed to your primary address, even though there's also another spot for you to put your mailing address as well. So the mistake that people might make with this is that some people will put their locum location, or they'll put their residency mailbox as their primary practice address if they haven't started working yet. And in one case, from what I've heard, someone put their residency mailbox address and it was sent to their residency mailbox, but because they're no longer a resident there anymore and they've moved away from that city back to their home city, that mailbox was actually like taken away and replaced by another mailbox for the incoming residents. So their like letters got sent back to the Ministry of Health, and so they just never ended up receiving their letters. So they had to call and say, can you change the address or send it back to my new practice address? And they weren't able to get their billing number until like a few months later. So that's kind of like the problem with having like a non-online way of receiving your billing number. So just because like I was worried that would happen to me, my tip to you is, if you can, see if you can call in and ask that your letters be mailed to your mailing address instead of your practice address. Because what if your practice address is in like a locum that's kind of in a rural area and you're not starting work there yet? So then you'd have to probably make like a trip there specifically just to get those letters. So that's why I said be careful what address you put down. And so that's my tip. Ask if you can mail it to your mailing address instead. So then now that you have the letters, you would register for your MCEDT account through this link. And I've included all the links in the comments below, just so that you can kind of, just so that everything is all in one place. The other thing that you should know about is not to forget about certain dates for when you submit your billings. Because, for example, I didn't receive my billing number until July 27th, but the deadline for submitting billings is July 20th. So if you missed out on that date, then you have to submit your billings with your August billings by August 18th. And so I won't actually be receiving my my July billings until September. So it's just something to keep in mind when you are budgeting, because you might not have any income coming in for perhaps July and August if you don't get your billing number early enough. And so just make sure, like at least with me, I had 3 months of living expenses saved up just to kind of cover my bills in the event something like this happens. And when it comes to keeping track of your billings, I've actually included an Excel spreadsheet so that you can kind of keep track of the date and the OHIP number of the patient. And I would advise you save that in kind of like a private area, so like either on your work desktop or on your work email if the work email is affiliated with your hospital or affiliated with OneMail. Okay, so another surprise I realized was that when it comes to billing software, as a resident, when I use the EMR system, um, I actually never noticed like a component where my staff would go to bill, and I just never thought of it because I never billed for my staff doctor. So when I started working at a hospital and I saw patients and I had to bill for the patients, I was like, oh, where do I do that? And then where do I do that? So I was told like, oh, you have to get your own billing software. So then often billing software is not built into the EMR system in a hospital setting, but if you're working in a community clinic, it often is included in the EMR system. So I kind of polled a forum of doctors, and so there were like maybe 100 something doctors who replied with examples of billing software that they personally use and that they like. So the list of it is here. And I'm not going to say specifically which one I used out of all of them, just to avoid any conflicts of interest with these companies. But some of them offer free trials. So if you want to figure out which billing software you like, just try some of them for free. And if you don't like it, then switch to another one for a free trial as well. So when it comes to anticipating how much do you make as a new staff, often the data out there, it's like an average. So it might not be realistic for a new staff because often as a new staff, you don't make what the average makes. Most of the people on the average have much more years of experience than you do. And they're probably faster as well. So in my month of July, these are like anticipated amount of how much I billed. I don't actually know if I'll actually receive this amount because I don't know if I'll get rejections or things like that. So obviously in the first 2 weeks of July, you probably won't be making a lot because there's a lot of onboarding stuff, orientation stuff that you have to do. So you're not really seeing patients. By week 3 and 4, that's when you might make a bit more because you're starting to get the hang of things. You start having access to the certain EMR software, so then you can bill. And by week 4, that's when I kind of like got more used to the flow of things and how things worked around here. So then that's why you'll see that on week 4, my billings were a bit higher. So all in all, if you add up the amount that I made in the first month, July, I probably made the same as I did as a resident. So that's just something to keep in mind so that you don't, suddenly increase your spending and your lifestyle all of a sudden as a new staff. I would still encourage you to kind of live like a resident for like the first year or so. Okay, so then overall impressions. I feel like becoming a new staff, it's kind of like starting a new rotation. There's a lot of like new things that you have to get used to. So for example, like because I work in 3 different settings, I have to learn how to use 3 different EMR systems. And there's also a lot of work to be done after work as well. So usually 2 to 3 hours after work, I try to read up on patients, like new cases that I saw, things I'm not familiar with, because there's a lot more, like you're the most responsible person now, right? So I try to make sure that I don't make mistakes. I try to like have my knowledge up to date. And there's also a bunch of administrative stuff I have to do as well when it comes to like figuring out what to bill and things like that. And just to kind of, as a tip to kind of cut down on how to deal with the administrative stuff, I encourage you to ask as many questions as you can of the existing staff there, of anybody who is familiar with the work environment. Because often I find if it takes me like an hour to figure something out, it takes someone else like 10 minutes to just explain it to you. The new thing is that I get to teach residents and I get to sign off on their consults, and that saves quite a lot of time because often my consults, when I see an addictions patient, it takes like an hour to see because of the detailed history that I have to take. And so I've been working with a really excellent resident, and she's very thorough, so like she's been helping me a lot. As well, you'll also find that there's a bit more flexibility in your schedule. So I mentioned that I work 6 days a week. If I wanted to dial it up or down, if I needed to shift a block of work from one day to another day, I can do that, and people are pretty accommodating. So I find that because there's more flexibility, I can work as much or as little as I want to. And I just want to provide you with some resources at the very end, because I wish I had these resources where I knew about them, but I didn't. And so it just took me like so much longer to like figure things out. And so hopefully by you watching this video, it'll just be easier for you to know what to do next, because instead of like trying to do this yourself in the dark. So you can definitely reach out to me on Instagram. Something I've been trying to do, because I've gotten a lot of requests to do this, is to kind of track my income like month by month, because there's not a lot of information out there about what a new staff salary is even like. So I'm happy to kind of like share on my Instagram account, what am I making in August, or how much did I get paid, like things like that, because I think a lot of new graduates have those kind of questions as well. And I've also had some medical students and residents send me questions through comments of this video or on my other videos, or they've just messaged me personally, and I'll try my best to reply. Through Joule, they also have another practice management resource list, and I think unfortunately you do need a CMA account, so a Canadian Medical Association account, to be able to access these resources. And it can be a little overwhelming. This is the link to it down below, and also in the comments as well. It can be a little overwhelming because there's so much resources. It's like a resource overload. So I would only suggest you using this when it's kind of time for you to think about it. Like, for example, when you're about to get an accountant, then maybe you check over the module 4. Or when you have a locum in place and you want to make sure if the contract is fair or not, then maybe you can read module 11. I wouldn't read all of them all at once, but just knowing that it's there, that's something that can be helpful. And if you don't have access to this because either you forgot your password or you don't have an account, linked down below is a Google Doc, which is the practice management resource list. And it also is pretty similar. It has kind of like links to outside resources that might be related to like practice management, or if you don't want to like look through all of it, I would just direct your attention to one of the links on this resource list, specifically this particular link called the checklist. I think there's one that's called like family medicine checklist or practice management checklist or something like that. I've also linked that down below as well. And it's kind of just like a checklist for you to kind of get a sense of what the timeline is generally when to do things. I think this is only for a family medicine on there, but if there's something similar for a specialty, definitely let me know, or like link it down in the comments, because I think that would help a lot of people as well. And finally, on Facebook, there's some resources as well. So some of you may have heard of the Physician Financial Independence Facebook group. That is a very focused Facebook group for questions about accountants, incorporation, more of the financial side of things, more general financial side of things. And also there's the first 5 years Facebook groups. So this is specifically for family medicine, but if there is one for specialties as well, definitely let me know down below. But I think this has been really helpful when it comes to seeing a patient that you're not really sure how to manage. So you can kind of ask the group, or if you're not sure about what to bill for something, you can ask the group as well. And it's a private group, and most people will ask questions on there, kind of like a case report type style of questions. And I found that to be very helpful too. So yep, that's what I said about specialists. So thank you so much for watching. If you want to stay notified of any other lectures that I put out as a new staff, like those kind of lectures, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications. And you can also check out some of my other videos about the other lectures that I've given as well. And lastly, if you have any questions, just leave it down in the comments below. I'm happy to answer all the questions, especially if it's such a new process and there's not a lot of materials out there on this.